Hello everyone, welcome back to MalStorm Gaming. My name is Malachi Gardner, and today I am going to be running through my top 10 solo games, which is actually very close to just being my top 10 games of all time because pretty much all the games I play are solo games. But these are my top 10 solo games. Now real quick, a couple of rules for this list. All of the games on my list are games that I own and are games that are actually released to the public. This list will not include games such as Deck of Wonders, which is a game that I really enjoy and would probably make this list, but it is not actually out yet. So that game is not going to be on my list. But next year, there's a good chance that I will be on the list because I really like that game. So that's just a quick thing there. These are my top 10 solo games of 2020. My goal is to kind of do one of these a year. These are not necessarily games that came out in 2020, but these are games that I enjoy a lot and have been playing a lot in 2020. So how am I going to do this? Well, I'm going to just run down my games, starting with number 10 and going down to number 1. And for each game, I'm going to give a brief synopsis of the game, and then I'll say one or two things that I especially like about that game. So, without further ado, let's go to number 10. Alright, so my number 10 is none other than To the Death, which is a tactical skirmish card game designed by Brian Garber. In To the Death, you are going to be controlling a team of 4 heroes, one from each of the 4 classes, the magicians, the champions, the fighters, and the menders. So you're going to take one character of each type, and you are going to be battling against a series of monsters. And your characters each have a bunch of unique skills, as well as you having a bunch of common skills that you're able to do. And so it just all goes together to give you a ton of options for what you want to do with your cards that you have in your hand that you use like actions. And so I really like how you just have so many options. I love when you are given a certain number of action points. In this case, it's actually cards, and the cards actually add a different element where you can't just use any action point to do any action. There's certain cards that you can discard to do certain actions, which will all go into the puzzle. So you might want to cast a fireball, and you also want to heal. You can't just spend 2 of your 5 action points to do that because there are cards and you need to discard the correct cards. So if the fireball and the healing, they both use cards with the number 5 on them, and you only have one, then you have to choose which one you want to do. So there's a little bit more caveats to it just because of the cards. It's not just a simple, you have 5 actions each turn, you have to think about them a little bit more, and I really like that. And so that is my number 10, To the Death. Okay, so my number 9 is Runebound 3rd Edition, published by Fantasy Flight Games. In Runebound, you're going to be playing as an adventurer who is going to be going around and exploring this massive map, and you're going to be able to talk to people and pick up quests, slay monsters, buy gear, and train skills and level up. And just the whole point of the game is to become powerful enough to stop some sort of big bad by the end of the game. In one of the scenarios, you're trying to stop a dragon who will enter the board at some point in the game, near the end of the game, and you need to stop him before he goes and destroys a city. So that's kind of what you're doing. You're trying to race the clock and try to beat the dragon before he gets to the city and destroys it. In another scenario, there is a zombie apocalypse, and there's just zombies everywhere, and you need to take them out. And in another scenario, there is this plague that's going around, and you need to cure people of this plague and quarantine people and try to ultimately cure this disease. And it's a little bit like the board game Pandemic, but you're still playing like an adventure RPG type board game. So I really like Runebound, and one cool thing that I like is how you have a lot of freedom in how you customize your characters. There's all sorts of different items that you can buy. There's 4 different shops around the map in the different cities. You can travel to different cities and buy certain things. And then as you defeat monsters and complete quests and do various things, you're going to gain trophies, which you can then spend on skills, which will give you different abilities, and there's just a lot of freedom that you have with what type of skills you want to pursue, what type of character you want to become. And I just like that whole feeling of where you start out as a really weak character and you just try to defeat monsters, complete quests, and end the game being powerful enough to destroy a dragon. And it just is really fun as you play through the game and become more powerful. And so that is my number 9, Runebound, 3rd edition by Fantasy Flight Games. Alright, now my number 8 is the Pathfinder adventure card game published by Paizo. This game takes the Pathfinder role-playing game system and makes it into a card game that can be played by 1 to 6 players. And in this game you have all sorts of locations that you are going to be able to explore, and each location is a deck of cards that the location card tells you kind of how to make it, except its contents are randomized. And then you have your character or characters, and each character has a card which tells you their stats and various abilities that they have, and then also tells you what cards you can put in your deck. Maybe you can have 5 spells in your deck and 3 allies. And it tells you just how many of each type of card you can put in your deck, and then you create your deck full of really weak basic cards which are like level 0, and then as you play you're going to be able to acquire better cards that go into your deck. First scenario, you might be able to acquire more level 0 cards, or you can also acquire level 1 cards, and later on you can acquire level 2 cards. And at the end of each game you're going to take your deck and you're just going to leave it in the box how it is, and then the next game you play, you're just going to take that same character deck that you made last time, and you're going to use that again, and you're going to go through a campaign. One thing I like about the Pathfinder adventure card game is how what happens in one game will carry over to the next game as you add new cards to your deck and swap out the cards in your deck. And then you can upgrade your character, you can improve their stats, unlock new special abilities, choose a subclass, and all sorts of different things, but then it can all be reversed, and you can put everything back in the box, you can sort everything out, and it's not like a full-on legacy game, but you still have that progression that I like. And as a fan of role-playing games, I like how this can be played solo very easily, and you don't need a DM or anything, so I can be playing a game that's kind of like a role-playing game mechanically, such as Dungeons & Dragons or Pathfinder, but I can be doing this on my own as a card game. So that is what I like about the Pathfinder adventure card game, and that is why it's my number 8. Next up is my number 7, which is Puzzle Dungeon, again designed by Brian Garber. In Puzzle Dungeon, there are just tons of monsters ravaging the land, and so now you have been hired as a monster hunter to go slay these monsters. Puzzle Dungeon is very similar to games that are played with a standard deck of 52 cards, and you are going to be collecting different suits of cards as you deal them out into your arsenal, or when you draw them into your hand and you're trying to get certain suits to defeat different monsters. Maybe this one monster needs 3 helmets and then 1 sword, so you need to discard 3 cards with the helmet suit and then 1 card with the sword suit, and then you defeat that monster and you get its reward. And then you can go on to the next monster and the next monster and the next monster, and it's very akin to Spider, where the cards are all laid out in a grid. It's a 4x5 grid, and so it kind of looks like Spider, and it kind of feels like one of those games, those classic games that you play with 52 cards in the deck. But Puzzle Dungeon is much more replayable than all those games because of all your heroes, which is the thing that I really like about this game. I like how you have, in just the standard edition, you have, I think, 32 characters, something like that. A lot of them are double-sided with more difficult versions on the back, and they all change the way you play quite a bit. And also there's the deluxe edition that you can get, which has it's like 400 characters in it, which is just insane, and each character just changes the game in a really cool way. Each of the characters are very simple, not very complex, but they each change the game in a significant enough way that makes them all feel unique. And I really enjoy just playing through them all, seeing what they do differently, what changes the game when you play with them. And that is just really enjoyable to me, just seeing how all those different characters interact with the game to create a unique experience. So that's my number 7 puzzle dungeon. Next up, my number 6 is Fantasy Flight's Lord of the Rings LCG. In the Lord of the Rings card game, you're going to create a deck of cards. You're going to choose 3 characters that are all from the world of Tolkien's Middle-earth, and you're also going to be choosing 50 cards to go inside your deck that will consist of different allies and equipment and events that you're going to be able to use, and you're going to take that on a scenario. And the game is known for being quite difficult. And a lot of what you're going to be doing is you're going to be playing the game with a deck you built, and then you're going to just lose completely. You're going to be completely obliterated. And then you're going to tinker with your deck a little bit, and then you're going to come back and you are going to lose again. And then you come back again after tinkering with your deck again, and then this time you win. And so then, after that, you get to go on to the next scenario, and you do the same thing with each scenario. Each scenario is kind of like a different puzzle, and you need to have a different deck to beat that particular scenario. And there are so many scenarios that are released now. There's just a ton of things that you're able to do. And each scenario, again, you have to kind of make your own deck specifically tailored to that scenario, to beat that scenario, then you can move on to the next one. And I just really enjoy that. The thing I like the most about this game is actually the deck building. I really like losing and then messing with my deck. So then next time I win. That is something I find very enjoyable. It's almost 2 games at once. One game where you're building your deck, and then the next game where you test out your deck, and then you go back to the first game. You just alternate between these 2 games, pretty much, and I really like that. So that is my number 6, The Lord of the Rings LCG by Fantasy Flight Games. Next up, my number 5, or halfway there, is Dragonfire, the deck-building game set in the Dungeons & Dragons universe and put out by Castleless Games. It's actually right here. With Dragonfire, it is a deck-building game, which means that you're going to start the game with a deck of cards. And those cards aren't very exciting. They're just kind of your average card that you get to use in this game. They're not very exciting. But then, as you play, you're going to be able to defeat monsters, which will give you gold. And then you can spend that gold to purchase better cards that will allow you to become more powerful, and you're able to do pretty cool things after you have purchased some cards. And then, after you play a card, it goes into your discard pile. And then, as you continue to draw cards from your deck, eventually, you're going to run out of cards in your deck. And then you're going to shuffle up your discard pile to create a new deck to draw from, and you continue drawing cards. But the interesting thing is that after you purchase a card and you play it, it's also in the discard pile, so then you get to possibly play it again after drawing it from your deck. And so these cards aren't just one-time use things, they actually will come back and you'll be able to use them a couple times. Now, Dragonfire is not your average deck building game, and I actually had another deck building game on this list that is more of your run-of-the-mill deck building games. This one is slightly different. It's not your typical deck building game, but this one's still really cool. The game revolves around having 4 different suits of damage, and you're playing cards from these different suits to deal damage to monsters to then defeat them. And it's very puzzly with how you are trying to work all of your characters and all their cards and their special abilities that they have to be able to efficiently defeat monsters. That can be a challenge because the damage needs to be dealt in a very specific order. It might be you need to do 1 blue damage, and then 2 damage of any color, and then 1 green damage, and then 1 red damage. And so it can be kind of a puzzle trying to figure out how to play all those cards in the right order to deal the most damage effectively, and you need to prioritize certain monsters and others, and the game often will make you think in kind of weird ways how, like, getting knocked out might not actually be a really bad thing. And so it's very interesting, and one of the things I really like about this game is that it also has like a campaign legacy type feel to it, where at the end of each game you're going to gain some experience points, and then you're going to spend those experience points to purchase features, which are stickers that you can place on your character, and they're going to give you more abilities. And one thing I really like about this game is that it drip feeds you these abilities and the experience points. It's really a slow thing. And a lot of people don't like that, but me personally, I really like how slow you acquire your special abilities, and so then you have to play many times before getting a new thing, instead of just getting a new thing every single game, which can be fun, but I prefer having to play several times before getting a new thing. It just makes getting that new thing even more exciting. So that is my number 5, Dragonfire. Next up, my number 4 is Spirit Island. And Spirit Island is published by Greater Than Games, and in Spirit Island you are going to be controlling a number of spirits. You can control 1, or you can play up to 6 players with an expansion, and each spirit is going to have their own unique abilities and their own unique playstyle, and you're going to be able to play cards to cause things to happen on the board. In this game, you play as a spirit, and you are guarding an island, and this island is being colonized by invaders from afar, and the native inhabitants are being displaced, and the island is being ravaged. And so you need to ward off the explorers and cause them to become terrified of you so that they just leave. And it is a challenge. And this game can be a brain burner. It especially becomes one when you have 2 or more spirits, and afterwards you kind of have a headache from this game, but it's worth it because I really like it and it's really fun. And one of the things I really like about this game is how you have all of these different spirits, and they are completely different. They are so unique, and I was mentioning how with Puzzle Dungeon, I like how there's all the different characters and they're all very unique, but they're still simple, and you don't really have to spend any time learning them. With this game, they are very different, but they're also extremely complex. Each one, it takes you a while to figure out like how that spirit works. For some of the more complex spirits, and even the simple spirits, are still very different from each other, and they all have their own unique rules that apply only to them, and they have their own unique cards and their own unique upgrade paths and their innate powers. They're just so different. Their setups are different. Everything about them is just different from each other, so it can take you some time to figure out how to best use the spirits that you have in that game to complement each other's abilities, to be able to ward off the invaders, because the game can be challenging, so you really need to be thinking about how you want to do things to be able to win the game. So I really like Spirit Island, and it is my number 4. Next up, my number 3 is Gloomhaven. Gloomhaven is designed by Isaac Childress and published by Pathfinder Games. In Gloomhaven, you are playing as a mercenary. You're not really fighting for anything other than your own wallets. You just want to get paid. You don't really care what you have to do, you just want to get paid. Gloomhaven is kind of like a Euro dungeon crawler, and you're going to have a hand of cards, and you're going to be able to use those cards to perform actions. Each card has 2 actions on them. You have a top action, which is usually like an attack, and then you have a bottom action, which is usually a move. And each turn you're going to play 2 cards from your hand, and then you're going to be able to do the top action of one, and then the bottom action of the other. And the enemies are all controlled by their unique deck of cards, and so each turn you're going to play one of those for each enemy, and so you're not quite sure what the enemy's going to do on his turn. But after playing with them enough, you kind of end up knowing kind of what type of things that they're able to do, but you're still not sure what they're going to do, and you're not even sure what the turn order is. So you might want to be running in with your brute character and dealing tons of damage to this group of skeletons, and then you reveal a skeleton's card, and then you realize that they're actually going before you, and now they're actually going to spread out and attack all the different players, and so now they're not huddled together in a group and you can't just do a bunch of AoE damage. So I like how in Gloomhaven, the box is massive and there's a ton of stuff, and it's almost like this mini world that you get to explore as you play through nearly 100 scenarios. So the campaign is going to take you hundreds of hours to play through if you actually end up playing through the whole thing, and there's all sorts of different unlockables that you can get. There are tons of characters that you have to unlock. You only start with 6 of them and you end up unlocking, I think, 11 more or something like that. I think there's like 100 different items that you can purchase from the shop, but you start with like 15 of them unlocked, so you have tons of things to unlock, tons of scenarios, tons of items, tons of characters, and then you also are able to upgrade your cards. So maybe you have a card that does 2 damage. Then you can put a sticker on it after spending a ton of gold, which took you like 10 hours to accumulate, and then now that card does 3 damage. And so you're able to improve your characters in several different ways, from buying items to upgrading their cards, and there's just a ton of things to unlock and improve in a permanent way, and I really like that. There's just a ton of things to do. You can play Gloomhaven for a really long time if you want to try to unlock everything and upgrade all your characters. It's a really fun game, it's really solid, but there's just so much stuff that you can do in between games. Just playing the game is just part of the experience. The whole campaign is also really fun. So that is my number 3, Gloomhaven. Next up, my number 2 is Marvel Legendary, published by Upper Deck and designed by Devin Lowe. Legendary has a lot of different versions of it. There's a Marvel version, there's an Alien version, I think there's also a Firefly version, just tons of other things. I think James Bond also has a version. There's a bunch of different versions. But the Marvel version is the original one, and that's the one that has the most expansions, and I think that's probably the most popular one. Because Marvel. In Legendary, since it is a deck building game, you start with a deck of really bad cards. And I was saying how earlier, Dragonfire is kind of a more unique of a deck building game. Legendary is more of a run-of-the-mill type game. In Dragonfire, your starting cards are actually not terrible. They're not great, but they're not terrible, and you're going to shuffle your deck like twice each game. With Legendary, the cards you have in your starting deck are trash. Complete and utter trash. And you're going to run through your deck dozens of times. So you're going to actually see more cards, and it's more about the cards you buy. In Legendary, you're going to have 6 cards in your starting hand each turn, and you're going to be able to play those cards to accumulate 2 different resources. You have Attack, which you can use to defeat villains who are invading the city, and eventually you're going to be able to use those against the Mastermind, whether that be Thanos or Dr. Doom or Ultron, and you're going to need to get better cards before you defeat Ultron or Dr. Doom or Thanos or any of these masterminds. So what you're going to do is you're going to spend the other resource, which is Recruit. You're going to be able to use your Recruit points to purchase cards in the headquarters section of the board to go into your deck. And there are tons of Marvel characters that you can use in your games. Pretty much any Marvel character that you can think of, unless it's really, really obscure, you're going to be able to use inside your game. So you can use Iron Man or Doctor Strange, Daredevil, any character that you want. You're going to create a hero deck each game, and then you're going to have some of these cards in the HQ, and then you're going to be able to use your recruit points to purchase these cards. They go into your discard pile, as well as all the cards that you had in your hand at the beginning of the turn, and all the other cards that you played and everything like that. You put all those into your discard pile, and you're going to draw new cards. And you're going to keep on doing that until you have no more cards in your deck, and then you shuffle up all your cards, which include your starting cards, as well as your extra cool hero cards that you purchased, and you're going to be able to shuffle those all together, draw a new hand of cards, and now you have the chance of drawing those really cool cards. And so as you play, you're going to be purchasing better cards, and eventually you're going to try to take down the mastermind, whether it be Thanos, Ultron, Loki, any of the Marvel supervillains that we all know and love or hate, and you're going to be able to defeat them. And after you've done that enough times, you need to get a couple hits in them, but after you've done that enough, then you win the game. So I really like Legendary, and one thing that I really like about it is just the sheer amount of variety that you have, all the different combos. Each game, in the solo game, you're going to use like 3 heroes, and there are hundreds of heroes that are out for this game that you can choose to put in your hero deck, and then that'll change your experience a lot. You also have different villain groups and different masterminds and different schemes, which are like scenarios, so you have just tons of different combinations. And each game, because of all the different cards that are being used, will be quite different, because you're going to be able to purchase completely different cards, fight against completely different villains, and the characters will interact with each other, the cards will bounce off each other and do interesting combos. There's a pretty cool combo chain system in this game, and so it's just really fun and kind of simple and straightforward, but you're able to just do the turns very quickly, and games are pretty fast, maybe 30 minutes, but you're able to just do that, and it's just really fun. I like to play Legendary while listening to podcasts, and that is just a very enjoyable experience for me, and so that is why Legendary is my number 2. And now, for my number 1 solo board game of 2020, it is going to have to be Marvel Champions, published by Fantasy Flight and designed by Caleb Grace, Michael Boggs, and Nate French. In Marvel Champions, you're going to be taking a hero, along with all the unique cards that go with that hero. You're able to choose an aspect, and then you're going to be able to add a bunch of cards to your deck to make a 40-card deck. And then you're going to shuffle up that deck and play against a villain who also has his own deck. And you're going to be able to do actually some customization to the enemy's deck as well. So you can make your deck from scratch, and then you can make the enemy's deck with some customizations. You and the villain both have a certain number of hit points, and you're trying to do damage to the villain. And then after you reduce his hit points to 0, he's going to go into his second stage, which he's going to become more powerful, and he's going to get more attack and more hit points, and then you have to reduce his hit points to 0 a second time, and then you win the game. But you have to do all that before he completes one of his 2 victory conditions. The first victory condition for him would be to reduce your hit points to 0. So you start with your own hit point value, 10 is kind of the average, and then if you ever go down to 0 hit points, then he wins. You also need to be wary of his scheme. He's going to be placing threat tokens on the scheme, and if you ever get to a certain number, it's going to advance. And if it ever advances too many times, then you lose the game. So there's 2 victory conditions that you need to watch out for, and you need to be balancing the threats and your hit points. And so that's just really interesting. And to play cards from your hand, on your turn, you're going to have to discard other cards from your hand. If you have a card that costs 2 resources, you're going to need to discard cards that give you 2 resources. Most cards just give you 1 resource, which means that you need to discard 2 cards to play this card. And since you build your own deck however you like it to be, all the cards in your deck you like. You like these cards a decent amount. And so you want to play all of them, but to play cards, you have to discard other cards, so you're not going to be able to play all the cards in your hand, and so which cards do you discard? And which cards do you play? I think that's a really cool mechanic, because you have all these cards you want to play, but you have to discard them to actually play cards, and so it makes you think about what you want to do. Yes, I want to play this card, but I might actually want to play this card more, and so I might need to discard that card that I wanted to play, because it does a ton of damage, but it's actually probably better to play this card over here instead and discard that other card. So it's just kind of a cool mechanic that I like. And also another thing that is very interesting about this game is that you have your character card, your hero. On one side, it is the hero form. So if you're playing with Black Panther, it's Black Panther. And Black Panther is allowed to attack and defend and thwart, which allows you to remove threat tokens from the scheme. Attack just does damage to the villain, and then of course defending just reduces damage dealt to you. But you also have the other side, which is the alter ego side. So again, if you're Black Panther, it's going to be T'Challa. And T'Challa can rest, which will allow you to recover hit points. And so you need to be on the correct side to do the correct action. If you are running low on health, you're going to need to flip over and then recover. But if the threat side, then you're going to want to be on the other side, and you're going to need to thwart. Also, certain cards can only be played on certain sides. If you have a swinging web kick and you're Spider-Man, only Spider-Man can play the swinging web kick. If you are on your Peter Parker side, you're not able to play the swinging web kick until you flip over. So there's all sorts of different ramifications of that. Each side also has different special abilities, and so you have all sorts of cool abilities that you're able to do, and you're going to need to be flipping back and forth, trying to do whatever it is that you want to do, and you're probably going to have to sacrifice some other really cool abilities to be able to play certain cards. So all of that comes together to create a really fun game that is really fast-paced and is just quite fun. And so that is why Marvel Champions is my #1 solo game of 2020. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I hope you'll check out some of these games. I've made videos for several of these games, and I will probably be making videos for even more of these games. So I hope you all enjoyed this video, it was helpful to you, and I hope you all have a great day. Happy gaming!